need to tell you something. It's a feel alone in a room, surrounded by people. I wanna know if you're feeling it too. Out on the roof, here with you. It all seems so distant.
Good afternoon, Sanbonani, goeiemiddag, and colleagues, friends. My name is Dr. Mphatho Zondi, and it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon as we kick off the monthly webinar series for the South African Women and Sports Foundation in 2020, one day at a time. It's a privilege to be invited into your spaces, whether you are at home, whether you are at work, if you are driving and just listening in live on us. A very, very warm welcome to you, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to kick off in a few minutes as we just wait for people to join our conversation and join our platform. I'm really excited and curious about not just our topic, which is particularly relevant in these days and in this day and age, but also about the two guests that are joining me to unpack this conversation today. If anything, the events of the past year have taught us to take things one day at a time. And that's why when I heard this phrase, I heard a friend of mine using it, 2020, one day at a time, it just resonated with me. Because the past year has taught us to take one day at a time. It's taught us to make one good decision at a time. It's taught us to just do one act of kindness at a time, appreciating each new day that we are blessed with. As we wait for more people to tune in, today we are kickstarting the 2021 series with the topic Mind Over Matter. We're chatting about how to overcome mental fatigue and also build emotional courage and resilience that will enable you to navigate the waters that we currently face. And in fact, not just survive them, but importantly, to thrive in the face of adversity. I will be your very proud host this afternoon, or your moderator, and I have the privilege of being joined by two guests and friends who will help us delve into this conversation and share their personal and professional experiences to help us explore this topic. If you are aware of anyone who will benefit from the conversation today, please feel free to take a moment to share the link with them and invite them into our conversation. I also, before I introduce my guests today, want to extend a very warm welcome to the chair of the South African Women in Sport Foundation, and Ndambi Ravele. It's really good to be here with you, and thank you very much for the invitation to host this platform and to just start the year with such an important and relevant topic. Now to the business of the day. I would love to introduce the guests that will be helping me unpack this. I have two friends and guests joining me, as I said. The first is Dr. Kirsten van Heerden. She's a clinical and sports psychologist who practices from Durban in KwaZulu-Natal. She consults elite and developing athletes as well as non-athletes. She herself is a former SA swimmer. She's an author and established speaker at local and international conferences. And she's also the most recent chair of the SASCOC, so the South African Sports Confederation and Olympic Committee Psychology Subcommission. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. van Heerden. It's good to have you here.
It's an absolute pleasure, and I'm really excited to be able to speak about this topic, but also to be able to share it with both yourself and the next guest, which I know you're going to introduce. You're both very accomplished women, and as I said, I'm so excited to be able to have an all-woman panel that we can talk about these things.
Absolutely, umandla, as we say. And as much as we are celebrating the fact that we're an all-woman panel, because this is the progress that we've made today, we also invite and warmly welcome our male colleagues, friends,
Absolutely.
and counterparts who are joining our conversation today.
Yes, definitely.
Our second guest is the ever-passionate, fiery, and inspirational Nolene Conrad. She's a six-time South African champion in the athletics disciplines from 3,000 meters to 10 kilometers and cross-country events. She is the winner of the Two Oceans Half Marathon in 2018, the Peninsula Half Marathon in 2018. She's represented South Africa at 3 World Half Marathons champions and 2 World Cross-Country Championships. She's also currently preparing for the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. But her prowess is not only on the field as an athlete. She is currently also running her own coaching business called Coaching with Care. And she works as an athlete manager for Ilana Mayer's EnduraCAD Athlete Development Program. Welcome, Nolene.
Thank you, Patu. Thank you, everyone, for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show and all women's panel.
So again, you can see why I'm so excited, not just about the topic, which is particularly relevant. I know I can relate to elements of this topic in my own personal journey. I've experienced and had to walk a journey with athletes that I have journeyed with over the past period. But I'm excited also because of the insights that we will gain from these two remarkable women through their personal and professional experiences. So just to be clear, the purpose of the webinar today is to help us understand the science of mental fatigue. We want to learn tools to manage this concept once we understand what it is and how it may or may not be impacting our lives. We also want to speak about courage because we need to look forward and look ahead at the year. How to build courage and how to also conserve courage. We also want to lastly speak about how to build and nurture resilience as we look to prosper. The goal is to prosper and thrive in the year ahead. Again, just to remind you, we invite you to participate in the conversation. If you're joining us from Facebook, please use the comment box to join our conversation, to share your own experiences, or to ask questions. If you're joining us from YouTube or any of our other channels, again, please just use the comment box. Feel free to tweet anything that you find valuable and tag the South African Women in Sport Foundation. We'd love for you to be engaged as we navigate this conversation. So let's delve into it. Let's get straight into the business of today. And maybe just to make sure that we are all on the same page, I'd actually like for us to start by unpacking this concept of mental fatigue. I mean, this term has come up time and time again in the past year. People are tired of uncertainty. They're tired of the non-stop treadmill, the pressures at work and home. They're tired of the roller coaster of emotions. But Kirsten, and perhaps I should direct this at you, is this really mental fatigue, number one, or are we just lumping all of these emotions into one umbrella called mental fatigue because it explains something about what we're feeling? Is it actually a real clinical diagnosis, or is it just something that is conceptual?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think, as you're saying, we're all feeling it, whether you are an athlete, a coach, a psychologist, a doctor, it's we're all experiencing these feelings. And I don't know that it's necessarily a clinical diagnosis as such, but it's certainly something that is very real for everyone. And there's almost this idea of, there's also this idea of isolation fatigue. You look at, for example, there's been research done on astronauts or on, explorers that go and on their own for many months at a time. And that's a very real thing as well. Saying maybe not a diagnosis, but a very real thing when you're by yourself. And I found that for a lot of people that I've worked with, it's that the sense of isolation of, even though now we can see some of our friends, it's still not the same. And so there's that sense of being isolated from people. And then, of course, it is mentally, it's really tiring. And by the end of the day, you're tired and you think, well, what have I done? I've been at home, even though you maybe done some working, you haven't traveled as much, you haven't gone out as much. But I think it's just all those pressures. So for me, it is an all-encompassing kind of catch-all phrase, but I think it really explains very well what everybody has been feeling.
I know that many athletes that I've had conversations with over the past period, one of the things that they've said has really exhausted them, and they struggle to understand this because they're not working towards, for instance, events just yet when they were all cancelled.
Yeah.
But they said, I'm just so tired of all the uncertainty. So you're on hold, you've constantly got the brakes on, and it's exhausting not knowing when the next thing will happen, or training towards something that is cancelled, training towards something. Nolene, is this something that you can relate to as an athlete yourself, or even amongst the athletes that you've coached?
Yeah, most definitely. I think as an athlete myself, I've experienced the uncertainty of not having races, and so you can't plan. You can't actually plan for the Olympic Games because you have to run a qualifying race, but they're training into your races, but you can't actually do that. So it becomes very difficult in that aspect. And I think when I'm coaching athletes also, I feel like a lot of the athletes are struggling at the moment because sometimes I know there was a cross-country essay supposed to take place, and when it didn't take, I understand the frustration as they look forward to these races I mean, week in, week out, that's their thing. And now that they can't do that, I mean, we spoke about fatigue. You know, last year they could handle it for a few months. Still, a few months was a big ask, but now it's continued on for a year, and everyone is experiencing that. With they're all just like they're tired of the uncertainty. They don't want to train anymore. There's nothing to look forward to. So, yeah, we do experience it like that.
Maybe, and Pata, maybe I can jump in here. And Nolene, if I don't know if you've experienced this. Also, what comes, I think, very often with this, I say uncertainty, races getting cancelled, or just not quite knowing what's going to happen. And as I said, it's not that we just all of a sudden are not busy. There is stuff to do. But what I found for a lot of athletes that I work with, they now have a lot more time to think. And that's become the problem. And also we speak about mental fatigue. It's just almost a better word for me is almost overthinking. Exactly. Because when and how and is it going to happen? Isn't it going to happen? So of course that is fatiguing. And I say it's been amazing how many athletes have said, I'm not normally alone with my thoughts for hours on end, like you're training or you're tired. And not just athletes. I think for all of us, we have a lot more time. In parts, I'm sure you're the same. I mean, for myself, I'm normally traveling a lot, whether it's, nationally or internationally, you're doing things. Whereas now, like my life is sort of narrowed down to my office and my home, and that's it. And maybe now that we can go to the beach, a swim every now and again. But yeah, so you have a lot more time essentially almost with your own thoughts.
I think, and that's actually something, maybe one of the conflicts, I guess, that there is in this particular time. So if you've just joined us, welcome. We are talking about mental fatigue right now, trying to understand what this concept means and how it may relate to each and every one of us. We've spoken about some of the contributing factors to mental fatigue, certainly amongst athletes. This uncertainty, the roller coaster of emotions, sort of having an event and getting it cancelled, having an event and getting it cancelled. Overthinking, as Dr. Van Heerden has explained, can also cause mental fatigue because many athletes find themselves with much more time on their hands and much more time to overthink and overanalyze certain circumstances. Our audience, though, isn't only athletes. We're speaking to a lot of people within sports, as professionals, as coaches. And I know that one of my challenges over the past period certainly has related to time, but actually just this feeling that there's too much that must happen in the same time capsule. And so being able to go to work for me was able to separate certain things and certain responsibilities. When I'm at home, I do certain things. I step out of home, I go to the office, and there I apply myself in a certain way. And I know that being at home, it almost just feels like everything must happen at once. And there's no start and end really to when things, to this ongoing.
No, for sure.
Nicely box things. And I know that for me has caused an element of exhaustion.
I fully agree. And I think, actually, I was also talking to someone about this. For me, I almost called them like markers of time. So I'm going to use travel again, like to say, well, next week I'm going to go to Joburg, or in 3 months' time I've got a conference, or, there are these sort of markers along the way that you almost work towards. And now it's not, as you say, it's just everything is at home.
Absolutely.
It's just, and we need those kind of little, these markers to show, okay, this, I'm contained in this space, and then I've got this space, and then I've got this space.
Dr. Van Heerden, the markers, but I have to be honest, a moment of truth. As a mother, the break as well. As much as going to conferences is hard work, it also actually does provide you with a little bit of a break when you've got a good excuse or a good reason not to be the person who's running and managing the house. You step away and you only concentrate. You've got that time travel where you're relaxing, and then obviously the deliverables at the conference. But Nolene, let's get back to the business. We understand a little bit more about the concept of mental fatigue. Dr. Van Heerden has outlined that it really may be, while it's not a clinical diagnosis, it certainly is our reality, and it's a combination of things that might contribute to you feeling exhausted, not just mentally, but certainly emotionally and also physically. Nolene, you've mentioned that this you can relate to this. And perhaps now let's start talking about what you've done. So perhaps talk us through some of the things that you've used or skills, tactics that you've used to help yourself emerge from this place of cloudiness and exhaustion.
Yeah, so for me, I think when I listen to you now, also, I just immediately thought of like me working from home also for a while, and how it disrupted my routine in that sense, where I was used to waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, going for a run, going to work, and now suddenly in lockdown, now you had to work from so you were more on a vibe. So you could, because you couldn't go run, you wake up a bit later, then you work in your pajamas, and it's all like, it just disrupts your routine. So I was like that for like a week or two, where I just was laid back, but then I decided, okay, Nolene, now it's time to focus and get yourself back on enough lazing around. But yeah, I do think that the lockdown was quite a difficult, tough experience, and especially I think for most athletes, preferably the younger ones, because I think with us experienced athletes, it's like we've experienced tough times in the sport. We've experienced failures and hardships and obstacles. So these young ones, they don't know that. So I think that's where they struggled, and I found it like important to just motivate the younger ones and mentor them through that time, to just educate them, and just think of it as like, you going through a tough time, but these young ones, they don't know these things. So it's trying to just inspire and educate them through a really tough time. But I also think from a mental perspective, for me, it's just to consider it as like, I just can try and do the things that I can control. So focus on the things that you can control. You can't control the coronavirus or lockdown or what happened, and your attitude towards it. So it's just about trying to stay positive and look at it from a different perspective. And like you say, to make little small steps, and just focus on the process.
I think two really great pearls, or a few pearls coming from Nolene Conrad. We're speaking about mental fatigue, and at this particular point in the conversation, we're trying to understand some of the tools that you can use to manage this mental fatigue, this emotional exhaustion, as it were. Nolene really drawing out, I think, a few points, but I'll highlight two. The first one that I really liked is, and we say this in athletics or as athletes all the time, control the controllables. There's certain things that you can't control, and the situation can become overwhelming, but you can't control the environment. You can't control what's happening with Corona around the world. You can't control whether industry is shut down or not. While it impacts you, you can't control it. Therefore, you focus on the things that you can control, and that's the first step. The other thing that Nolene pointed out was just finding something to focus on, and I really enjoyed that. So in other words, find something to focus on so that at least you have a little bit of sense of accomplishment. And the third point, Kirsten, before I hand over to you, is just remember, you have gone through hard things before, and you have come through them. And that's one of the tools actually we often speak about when we talk about resilience, reminding yourself of what you've been able to navigate and how you've been able to do that. But let me hear from you, Kirsten. Anything, we're speaking about managing mental fatigue. Any practical tips that you can give us?
How you can do that? Yeah, she also mentioned there, which I think was super important, is this idea of structure and routine. Yes. And full disclosure, I don't have kids, so I understand that what I'm going to say might be easier when you don't have children. But for athletes, actually, when athletes retire, when they stop, one of the things they battle with the most is loss of structure and routine, because their days are so planned out for them. And not just athletes. I mean, even myself, I laugh and tell my friends very often, because as a psychologist, you have like hour slots with clients. And I often, even on weekends, like I think in hour slots. I mean, have coffee with my friend for an hour. Yeah. So, your days are very structured and you know what to do. And when you don't have that, it's incredibly disorientating. And so one of the practical tips, and I encouraged everyone that I worked with, was to very quickly sort out some kind of a routine. And as I said, I get when you have children, it makes it that much more difficult. But even with that, to somehow make sure you're waking up, getting out of your pajamas, doing some exercise, and setting as much of that as you possibly can. And also she speaks to controlling the controllables. And maybe if we can go to my first slide, because it kind of speaks a little bit to that, which I quite enjoy. And also I'll have some practical tips. So I don't know if we can put up the slide number 1.
I'm sure Naz will bring it up in a second.
Sure. And what it is, it's called the happiness formula. And again, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but I'll explain now.
It helps us understand things.
Yes. So I'm not sure if it's coming up, but I'll explain it anyway. So what it is, what we've looked at happiness, that they're almost like these 3 elements. So number 1, we have something, I think it's, there we go. All right. So I attempted a happy face there. So I've got it's the S, the C, and the V, and you'll see little percentages underneath. And so S basically stands for your set point. And as we know, there's actually almost a genetic component towards how happy we actually are. Just temperament. Babies, have different temperaments. And it's around 50% of our, I'd say some people are more optimistic, some people more pessimistic. And I'd say it's around about half that kind of, it's a set point. And this is also why very often I'll get onto that now. C stands for circumstances. And as you'll see there, it's actually only 10%. And we often think our circumstances contribute a whole lot more, to our happiness than actually it really does. And I think a lot of probably the listeners will have heard this, but I'll tell it anyway. They did some research on sort of like lotto winners, and they actually, for sure, straight after they've won the lotto, their happiness goes up. But if you ask them around about 4 or 5 months later how happy they are, they've actually returned back down almost to that set point that they had before. It's the same thing when people have had something really terrible happen to them. Like, let's say, I don't know, they've had a limb amputated or something like that. Again, of course, happiness goes down, but also around about after 4 or 5 months, they actually return to that set level. So the important part there is actually the V. It stands for voluntary control, and it's 40%. So almost half of our happiness is to do with things that we can control. And Nolene, that speaks to your point. How do we, what things can we control, and how do we make sure we're doing those? And, and I'm sure, and I would love to hear from you too as well, but so often the things we think we can control, we actually can't. We can influence them, but we can't actually control them. And in my experience, and myself included, a lot of athletes are control freaks. We like to control things. And, and it's like, but we actually can't. So for me, this little formula, what I like about it is simply this idea of, and thanks, you can take it off now. I'll explain the other slides just now, that we have to be careful that we don't think circumstances are the main source of our happiness. And don't get me wrong, it does influence. And of course, as we said, there's this isolation fatigue, mental fatigue. But we have to certainly focus on those things like having a set routine, continue exercise. And I really love, I think the World Health Organization said it's not, I know we use the word social distancing, but we should rather use the word physical distancing, because we need to stay socially connected. And so, phoning your friends, even though it's weird and it's on WhatsApp, a video call and those, but staying connected to people, those are the kinds of things that we need to keep doing that's under our control.
I quite like that circumstances, we need to retain that perspective, that circumstances aren't the only contributor to your happiness. In fact, we've all heard, don't let your circumstances define you. And one of the quotes that I really like, especially during that period of the tough, hard lockdown, is your present situation is not your final destination. And oftentimes we need to remind ourselves that when things are not looking good, your present situation is not your final destination. You're just here now. Look to where you want to go and start thinking of the small steps that you can take to work yourself towards that. Nolene joining us, thanks so much. Nolene just left us quickly to find a place of good connection. But essentially, we're just, Nolene, drawing out on those points that you really raised around controlling the controllables, around putting structure in. And Dr. Fanira just added a few tools. I quite like that happiness, what do you call it, the happiness formula.
Happiness formula.
I really enjoyed that. Again, let me just take an opportunity to welcome everyone that's joined us in this afternoon's conversation as we kick off the 2021 series of the South African Women in Sports Foundation webinar series. In this monthly series, we unpack various topics that are relevant to our stakeholders. And of course, if you've got any suggestions of topics that are particularly you're interested in, feel free to please email us these topics, in fact, even speakers if you'd like to, and you can use any of our handles and find out information on any of our web handles. Coming back to the topic today, we're speaking about mind over matter. We're wanting to understand how to overcome mental fatigue and very specifically how to build emotional courage so that we can thrive in the period ahead. I'd like us to move a little bit towards this concept of emotional courage. And Nolene, you are an inspiration because of your journey. You know, many people know you, but some people don't. And so perhaps, let me just start by, I know that recently perhaps has been a very tough period for you. Last year, preparing for the Olympic Games, there was an injury. Maybe just share a little bit of your most recent journey with us as we start unpacking this conversation around courage and what it looked like for you.
I don't know if you can hear me a bit better now.
Great.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so just a bit about my background. I was born in Bishop Lavis. I come from a really tough background. I mean, grew up in really bad circumstances, moved around a lot as a kid with my family. I'm one of 4 siblings. None of my siblings does any sport, and I wasn't introduced to sport as a young teenager. So I kind of like my father was an alcoholic and he lost his job, so it was really tough. Like I said, during those days, it was really tough to get by, to survive, and so really coming from that background, you know, it prepared me for everything else in life, I think. And then to add on to that, I was diagnosed with asthma at the age of 13. So so then I started my running journey when I was 16 because of a near-death asthma experience where I had to be rushed off to hospital in the middle of the night. And started at school, being introduced to cross-country running in high school by a friend. And when I reached matric, you know, I discovered that I had a talent for the sport, and I obviously started loving it. At the beginning, it was not easy. It was very difficult to run with as an asthmatic, to breathe, you know, if you're struggling to breathe on. Most of these people that have experienced corona during this time and have had breathing problems would identify what I'm talking about. It's not nice to have breathing issues.
Absolutely.
To struggle to breathe. So that was kind of part of my life for about 5-6 years, in and out of hospitals. And when I decided to move, for the first years, and it got better afterwards. Like I said, I started cross country in school, and then moved on to the track, and eventually moved onto the road at the age of 26. So I mean, I was doing for ladies as a junior just to put food on the table. You know, the prize money that I received during that time was to help my family survive and put food on the table.
So, I mean, Nolene sharing that in her early years, and we do apologize for the connection issues, but Nolene sharing in the early years that hers was not an easy childhood, like many other athletes and many other South Africans here. She was raised under tough circumstances, financially and even within the home environment. Certainly not ideal for a young growing child, sharing that her father was an alcoholic. Yet what comes through in the story, and perhaps this is the first sort of example of courage is how she discovered a talent once she had been diagnosed with asthma, and really just pushed through in pursuit of exploring this new sport that she loved despite the circumstances, and how this sport actually became that which put food on the table. The prize money, the little prize money that she earned in her very early years, being what would feed the family that was otherwise destitute. We'll bring Nolene back into the conversation as soon as we've sorted out the connection issues. But I think one of the things that I want to speak to Dr. Van Heerden, as we speak about emotional courage, I think to acknowledge that we all come from different circumstances, right? And our hardships are different. But just because they are different, it doesn't invalidate them. Because I think sometimes there's also guilt that comes with certain things, right? Like maybe I shouldn't be feeling that because I know I've got this, you know. Well, we need to recognize privilege. What we also need to acknowledge is we all go through hardships, and it might look different to different people. Any comments around that?
No, I fully agree. And even like, for example, earlier I spoke about myself, let's say not having children. So on one hand, you're like, okay, people might, well, lockdown is way easier for you because you don't have kids. And you're like, yes. And then you might feel bad because you're like, yeah, why am I struggling to not have kids? But then you also have to look at those people that are maybe single on their own, you know, and don't have children or don't have a family. It's equally difficult. It's just different. And so you say it's the same thing with circumstances, and no one's struggles, you say, are invalidated or not real to them. And those feelings are very real to them. And you're right, as soon as we start kind of evaluating and judging difficulties as better or worse, you know, then I think we're on a slippery slope, for sure. And you say, for me, definitely, it's about validating emotions. And the struggle is real for everyone in different ways. And so everyone is deserving a little bit of, as you say, just that kindness and gentleness. And that's why we also all, as you say, and I really do enjoy that idea of courage. And there's a Harvard professor, she's actually South African, but she works in Harvard University, called Susan David, and she's written a book on emotional flexibility. And one of her things, she says, courage is fear walking. And I always love that, you know, courage is fear walking, and that we all are fearful during this time. You know, we can all be worried during this time, whether it's finances, whether it is about getting ill, people that we love getting ill, about not being able to compete. But yeah, we can continue to walk. And I don't know if you're happy to share then my next two slides, because it kind of speaks a little bit to this and maybe how we can manage some of our emotions. Are you happy for me to go into that?
And as we're waiting for those slides to come up, we'll just see if we can, because I know that we're sorting out some back-end issues.
Sure.
You know, what I do think we should do at this platform, specifically given the context, is we need to realize. So we've said that everyone's struggles are real. But of course, we're not all in the same boat. And that's really important to also acknowledge. You know, we're not all in the same boat.
Absolutely.
The reality is that in this past period, there are people who have not had food on the table. And we're speaking about athletes themselves and professionals who have been retrenched or laid off. There are athletes who, like Nolene did in her early days, and many who still do right now, they need to compete to earn a living. So this has been incredibly tough, you know, incredibly tough in this period. So in saying that all of our struggles are real, of course, we're not trying to dilute, you know, the harshness of some people's struggles. Relative even to other circumstances, let me just say. But no,
I agree with you.
Acknowledging those struggles and perhaps just saying, okay, what can we do in the face of such adversity?
For sure. Sorry, partners, interrupting me. I was just saying, I fully agree. And exactly, you know, when people are battling to put food on the table, it doesn't say like that, you say those are very serious issues. And, you know, I've also had a couple of people say, oh, well, sport, does it matter that sport is not on? Again, it's not the end of the world, it's just sport. But as you say, for professional athletes, this is their livelihood. They don't run, they don't compete. And many athletes are supporting many different family members. So although we can say, oh, it's just sport, it's just entertainment, it's not. These are people's livelihoods. So, and I agree with you. So we have to be mindful of the fact that some people's struggles, you know, they're closer to that line of almost like falling off that cliff, you know, and some of us a little bit further away. But one of the things, and I say maybe, and I always use these examples because I love this idea, is that how do we help manage some of our emotions, manage some of that fear? And this is one of Susan David, one of her quotes, and she said, tough emotions are part of our contract with life. Discomfort, quite frankly, is the price of admission to a meaningful life. And I love that, just in that we often think of emotions as positive or negative. And I don't always like that, because I don't think they're negative emotions. Let's say sadness. It's not always negative. Like sometimes we should feel sad. You know, sometimes things are difficult and we should feel these things. They're just uncomfortable emotions. But we have to kind of think about, okay, how do we deal with them? And if we go to the next slide, I like this sort of analogy of if you imagine our emotions a little bit about like the weather, and I just took a little a picture of the weather there. It's a little app called Vintusky. There are plenty of them, but this was the other day, and it just shows you the different temperatures around the world. I always say, like, I'm a little bit of a weather nerd just because I always look at what the sea's doing and if I can go swim in the sea or not. So what the wind is doing and those kind of things. That I like this idea. If we look at this, this was taken a couple of days ago. Some places are incredibly hot. Some, as you see at the top, when you're getting purple, it's freezing cold. Others are kind of temperate. But this is a picture of the whole world. Everybody has got some stuff that they need to do this day, regardless of what the weather is. And I know in England, one of their favorite sayings is there's no bad weather, just bad clothing, which I'm not sure about that. I'm like, no, I'm very happy to live in sunny Durban. But it's this idea of, we have the weather. Like today, it's beautifully sunny. I didn't say, well, I'm just not going to work because I want to go to the beach. Or if I woke up and it was pouring with rain, I also don't say, well, I'm just not going to go and pick up or take my kids to school today just because it's raining, or I'm not going to go buy groceries. There are things that we have to do. So we have to notice the weather, of course, and to be able to dress appropriately, get an umbrella, maybe leave 10 minutes earlier because there'll be traffic. But we don't let the weather dictate to us what we're going to be doing. And emotions are a bit like this. They are a bit like the weather. We have various different emotions every day. But as we said, emotions are data, not directives. In other words, they give us information, like we really care about this, or this is something very meaningful to me, or yes, I'm nervous about this, or yes, I'm fearful about the future. So they tell us something about the situation. But I love this idea of they're not directives. We don't just act, we don't have to be directed by our emotions, just like we're not always directed by the weather. We have to notice it. We have to manage it, but then we kind of get on with what we need to do. And this is also where structure and routine kind of help. Of course, there is sometimes severe weather. You're not going to go outside if there's a hurricane. So, same thing. Like, if your emotions are that extreme, and if we're talking about more mental health issues, that's something a little different. But I love this idea of it's okay to have good, bad weather. It's okay that the mood sometimes are a little bit, up and down and that. That's cool. And to say you look at them, you get back to your structure, you phone a friend, you put on some calming music, you go for a run or you go for a swim, but then you get on and do what you need to do with the day. They say, I like it. It's data, not directives.
I guess it also ties in with this conversation we had around control the controllables. So in other words,
exactly.
You decide how you respond, not necessarily act in a certain situation. And so you can acknowledge that today I'm feeling particularly down, but don't let that angst, inform what the rest of your day looks like. I think that's really important. So really valuable there. Thulana, giving you a hand clap there with that little curl of information because we're speaking about courage, and again, I just welcome everyone who's joining us on this platform. I invite you to please share your own experiences. So we're speaking about mental fatigue. Have you been through a particularly tough time this past period, even historically? And if so, what did you do to help yourself navigate through that period? We're speaking about courage. We started the conversation on emotional courage. If you have any questions for Dr. Kirsten van Heerden, who is a psychologist, a former athlete herself, please do ask your questions, and you're welcome, of course, if there's a way to post them anonymously. But I quite like speaking about this concept of courage. There are a number of great quotes around courage. Some say courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in the presence of fear. So we mustn't be put off by this concept that I'm afraid. It's okay, it's normal to be afraid in certain circumstances. And being courageous is not about not being afraid. It's being able to act in the presence of fear. Our former president, Nelson Mandela, said, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, again, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. So again, just speaking to the fact that courage, fear exists. It's something that we all have to experience and navigate. And courage is really being able to act despite the fear, and of course to triumph over it over a period of time.
No,
we must just apologize. Nolene has had connection issues. She is our second guest for today, really inspirational athlete and coach. And I'm sure she'll be joining us if she's able to sort out those connection issues to continue to share her own experiences related to this topic. And also, of course, how as a coach, she's been able to help her athletes navigate this. let's just shine the spotlight on athletes, since we are speaking about sports. And perhaps what we want to talk about, what we need to talk about is just this Olympic elephant in the room, if I can call it that. It's really been such a difficult period for athletes, and I acknowledge for the local organizing committee at the Olympics as well. The Olympics is a pinnacle event for many athletes, administrators, and people involved in sport. And of course, the postponement of the Olympics last year was the right decision under the circumstances, right? But the reality is a lot of people have struggled with the uncertainty. There have been a lot of tournaments, and it's not just the Olympic Games. The Netball World Championships were postponed as well. So again, it's around this uncertainty and this fatigue that comes with this postponing of events. Dr. Van Heerden, what has your journey and your advice been with athletes who are struggling with this? And I think perhaps, tying in, I'm just reading a comment right now from
I think we've lost a person.
A lovely supporter of the Women and Sport Foundation in South Africa. Welcome to you. She's asking, how does one deal with mental fatigue due to all these unpredictable times? She herself is in sports, more in the marketing space, but really certainly also tying in with this conversation around the Olympics and this postponement and this uncertainty. Dr. Kirsten, how have you navigated this with your athletes and in fact your non-athletes and clients struggling with the same issue around uncertainty? It looks like we've also lost Dr. Van Heerden for a second.
Dr. Patu, I think we've lost Kirsten for now.
All right. It looks like we've lost Kirsten for now, so I'm just going to carry on the conversation. The question really being around mental fatigue and how we have navigated this.
There we go.
Perhaps
I'm back.
Share some of
There we go.
the conversations that we've had with our athletes. We spoke around the fact that there's certain things that you cannot control, and we know that, and so that's one of the things that we just have to acknowledge. We need to acknowledge that there will be fear and frustration in these times. But one of the real gems that Nolene shared with us earlier is just controlling the controllables, So in other words, deciding in your realm of influence, what is it that I can focus on? What is it that I can control? Where are the little goals? What are the little goals that I can set in these times of uncertainty? So what are the stakes that I can put in the ground so that I give myself something to work towards, where I do have influence, where I do have control? It's great we have both Dr. Van Heerden and Nolene back. I'm hoping that we have sorted out these connection issues. But let's just address the question at hand, Dr. Van Heerden, before I bring you back into the conversation with you. We're talking about uncertainty and how we deal with mental fatigue in these unpredictable times.
For sure. And again, it's a great question. This is what we're talking about. What do you do? And I think, as we've said all along, the first thing is actually to acknowledge how difficult these times are. And I often say to the athletes, almost very little that I say is going to make you feel 100% better, but I think that we can at least sit with athletes and coaches and go, this is a really difficult time. And I'm a firm believer in not just positive thinking, because I don't think it works. Life is tough sometimes. It is difficult sometimes, and we have to acknowledge that. And sometimes coping doesn't mean that you are fine every day. It means that you get through. And as you said before, reminding yourself that you've got through. So how you help athletes, I would say, is number one, as we said, you acknowledge their feelings, you acknowledge their fears. I think we have to avoid kind of these discussions of when is it, isn't it, that gets exhausting. It's almost like, sometimes before an exam, if you remember at university and people say, have you learned this? Have you learned that? And you're like, oh my goodness, and you stress out and you're like, actually, I just want to focus on this one thing. So we acknowledge it. But then, as you said, Nolene, getting back to controlling things. I spoke earlier about forming some kind of routine, making sure that you have some kind of structure that you can fall back on. And, as Patu said now, these little goals that you can work towards. But I would really encourage the people that are listening, when we speak about controlling the controllables, and I mentioned this earlier, to really, really think about, can I control this thing or not? Because, like, for example, athletes, you often say, can you control the outcome? Can you control winning? And so often they'll go, for example, yes, I can. And you're like, that's great. If you could control winning, I think we'd all win and be world record holders and everything. Actually, you can't. You can influence it. And I think people get themselves into trouble when they think they can control something, but they actually can't. So anyway, my encouragement and a little exercise to sit down with athletes is actually work through a list of, are these controllables? Are these uncontrollables? And we don't have to like the uncontrollables, but we just have to acknowledge them, and then we move forward. And this is also the incredible power of our attentional focus, as we know. When we're focusing on one thing, it's amazing how other things tend to disappear.
Absolutely. Nolene, you're back just in time, because we have a question from one of our stakeholders joining us from Facebook, Tolana, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who's commenting about her struggle as a student athlete. You know, there's the juggle of being present fully on the field, and of course having to apply yourself to your academics as well. Commenting that she struggles with the mental fatigue due to staying focused and motivated on the field, and of course adjusting to online learning, which is just another thing that we haven't even began to unpack. So Nolene, you deal with young athletes who are students. What has been your guidance related to this particular conundrum?
So I think also it's about balance in life. So just to balance out the two and have a good so you want to combine sport with studies. And I've said it on my social media also, you can't put all your eggs into one basket. I mean, you can't just be a professional athlete. You have to have something else that you can focus on. And it's nice that the student says that they are studying, because now from races being taken away and they're not able to do their studies. And obviously online is a bit different to what we used to. I mean, we're all having to adapt. And so the other thing is also having a different perspective in terms of adaptation. So yes, it is a different situation, but how can I make it work? Yeah, and I think the big thing for me is also with emotional well-being. She said, just focus on trying to be present in the moment, going out and maybe doing things that energize you, like gardening or cooking, things that you can always come back to, and then you go, because we know studies is also very draining on one. So I always find that if I keep the balance between my studies, my running, and doing something else that relaxes me or energizes me, that I can go back to that thing and give it the energy or the attention it needs.
Yeah. Could I maybe just add a point there? Sorry, can I jump in?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Nolene, that's also such a critical point when you say go do something like whatever, go do something like baking or do something else. And I mean, maybe this is, I know maybe going a little bit off topic, but I find also when people, their whole identity is just in one thing, and then when it's kind of got taken away, so like athletes, their whole identity has been an athlete, and now they can't compete. Yeah, it becomes an issue. Whereas you say, at least if you know that, look, I also love doing this, and I also love doing this, and I can draw my sense of self-worth from these other areas of my life, it's a little bit easier to deal with what we're going through. But those athletes where their sole sense of self-worth is from their performance, that's really tough for them.
I think maybe just coming back to Tulana's question, the other consideration is that things are different now. And so you've spoken specifically about online learning and how suddenly it's just a new challenge, you're having to adjust to it. And I think you bring out a critical point here. What we need to acknowledge is things are different, and therefore we might need to do things differently, right? And we need to also make a provision to this. So your word adjust is the correct word. The formula that we used while we were attending in person, being given lecture notes, we were able to separate. We talked about putting our lives into neat little boxes. We might need to build a new formula that accommodates these new circumstances. And in your case, particularly, Tulane, is the online learning. So some of the frustration and some of the fatigue might be due to the fact that you might be trying to do things the same way, use the same formula, and it's not working under these circumstances. And that will just be a process of trial and error. So we need to figure out what might work differently. It might actually be that instead of going to lectures between, for instance, 9 and 3, if that's what you were doing, it might be really difficult to concentrate at home during those times. And so it might actually be, maybe if you're in the online space, because it's quite busy at home and there's people interacting with you, moving your study block to a little bit of an earlier time when nobody's awake, and you're training a little bit later because now you can, because you're online. It really might just be a trial and error. And Nolene, are there any specific sort of changes that your students have discussed having to make in the context of online learning?
Yeah, I think it's the same advice I gave to them, that when I was a student, basically what I used was the balance factor, where my running actually made me more productive in terms of studying, and I could work out a timetable myself, and run in the morning, come back, do your studies, learning and whatever, and then come back and you go back to the field, and you give it time, yourself time slots. Like, I'm just going to train for 1 hour and then go back to the books. Yeah, but the students all mentioned that it was tough. Some of them have 1 week on where they physically able to see the lecturer. So now it's different in that sense, where they don't physically see, they have to go and study on their own, and do all the work on by themselves. But yeah, it was just that it is something different and
Absolutely.
something that they need to adapt to, but also then to just try and tune into your mentors, and try and get their advice and their
So I
guidance
really
on
like
it
that
as
point.
well.
I really like that last point because we haven't spoken about it. Is that one of the tools, one of the keys is leaning into people, right? And so you don't have to go through this alone. When it comes to students, share ideas, share your struggles with other students, and understand how they might be adjusting their schedules to fit things in. And of course, not everyone is a student athlete, so speak to student athletes, but also speak to other students, because you might be able to take some tools. But also, really importantly, lean into your mentors, lean into people maybe who have walked a similar journey, or have gone through similar struggles before, and can shed some insight and share their experiences. You are not alone in this journey. We are all trying to navigate it, and though our circumstances may be different, we can certainly learn from each other. We're talking about mental health today, specifically mind over matter, understanding the concept of mental fatigue and how to build emotional courage in these testing and turbulent times so that we can thrive in the times and in the year ahead. Again, we invite you to join the conversation, to share your own experiences. We welcome you on the various platforms where this is streaming live. Our latest person joining, hi, Veronica and Kobeni, good to have you here. Please share your experiences. Please ask questions to our athletes and coach, Nolene, preparing for the 2020 Olympic Games. And of course, Dr. Kirsten van Heerden, a sports psychologist and a former athlete herself. I want to come, again, let's speak about this concept of courage, because I think courage acknowledges the fact that there's uncertainty, there's fear, but I like the word in that it's positive. It gives hope. And so I want to come back perhaps to this conversation around courage, and unpack it, a little bit more. The first thing, though, I think we need to also maybe talk about, because we've spoken about changes in online learning, we've spoken about coronavirus, we've spoken about financial pressures, but one thing we haven't spoken about, which really also has affected people badly, is this concept of loss, Dr. van Heerden. This period has been characterized by a lot of loss. Specifically grief as well, as people have lost loved ones. What has your experience been in this past period? And can you share some tools with us just around understanding grief? And of course, it just adds complexity to everything we've discussed in this particular conversation.
For sure. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it's an incredibly important issue. You're absolutely right. And I think we tend to sometimes think as grief as only when someone has passed away. And of course, some of us and some of the listeners here would have experienced that, someone we love and someone we know having passed away. But I think it's important to say that people go through grieving processes when there's any type of loss. And you think about those matric students last year that couldn't get to play their last year of sport, or couldn't get to go to their matric dance, or, the athletes now that you say, like, we're going to maybe retire after, the Olympic Games last year, and maybe it was the last time and now they can't. So this grief is a really tough emotion. And I think the thing with that is we used to think that there was this kind of stage-wise progression through it. There was denial, and then there was anger, and then depression, and bargaining, and then like you're okay. And it's what we know now. There's not like a stage-wise progression through it. With grief, what happens, you can feel so many different emotions in one day. You can feel angry about what you've lost. You can feel down and sad about it. You can feel like, okay, no, I'm actually all right. You can feel like, just, I can't believe this is happening. You have all of these different mix of emotions. And the really hard part about this is that you have to feel those emotions. And people mean well when they say this, but like they kind of just want to make you feel better. Like just be positive, it'll all be fine. Like just think positively. And actually, it's completely. It's when I say it's the worst thing to say, what I mean by that, I get it comes from a good place, but what the person really needs you to do is sometimes just go, yes, this is very difficult. This is a really tough time, and as you say, but you're not alone, and I'm here whenever you need to talk about it, because that grief will pop up again if you don't deal with it.
And I think the important facts that I've experienced personally, having lost a loved one recently, is it's important to acknowledge that different people experience grief in different ways.
Completely. There's not one way to grieve. Exactly that. There really isn't. There's as many different people as there are in the world. There are different ways to grieve, and depending how it's gone. And again, I think people can sometimes feel guilty, but I'm not feeling like this, and maybe I should. You say like a loss of a limb, and you're like, no, actually, there's many different experiences that you can have.
Grief also being one of the contributing factors, of course, to mental fatigue. We're here with you until 2:30, so don't log off. Do stay tuned with us. And again, we invite you to share your own experiences and ask questions freely and candidly of our guests and experts here. Nolene, on the conversation of courage, because in order to be courageous, you obviously are navigating something. What are some of the toughest, or maybe the toughest moments that you've been through, firstly as an athlete, in your journey to success?
Sure. That must have come most recently. And as you can see, part of my brand is Live Courageously. It obviously builds on my previous history, my background, coming from an asthmatic background. But I think my most toughest that I've ever experienced was now during, since 2019 to mid 2020, where I had experienced that long-term injury. And I must say it was a frustrating period for me and it was also one that I gave up so many times in my mind, and I said, why not retire? Is my sport done? Am I done? And that to a point where running meant so much for me that I couldn't see my life without running. And for me to not be able to do what I love and to lose that was like I was experiencing grief in that sense, where I didn't think I'd get to the sport, because everyone told me, no, just leave it now. I've seen multiple doctors, physios, bios, everyone tried to help me. I was being treated like a lab rat. And I think that just broke me on all levels. I mean, emotionally, mentally, physically, I was drained at the end of the day. Ilana also told me, Nolene, don't you just think it's time, to hang up your shoes? And I just said to her, like, I come from a background where I really never gave up, and I know that this is not the end of my sport, and I know it's a tough time, but she really wanted me to be in, my well-being came first and foremost. The sport was secondary, and it took me a trip to Ireland to really gain some perspective on life. I think from then, when I came back, I was prepared for this coronavirus lockdown. I mean, I came back just before coronavirus started, but then, it was like I was already, I'd experienced that in Ireland, where I not just went for physical treatment for my injury, but also they tried to help me on emotional and
That's great.
And mental, just to try and get me back, because I wouldn't have come out of lockdown in a good state if I hadn't gone through that island experience. I think that's why I can give that experience and advise young athletes also to have something, like we said earlier on. Don't just build your identity on running. You have to have something else, and at the end of the day, you need to put yourself first as well. You need to focus on other things. You cannot make your running, your only thing, because what if that's taken away from you at the end of the day? I mean, then you can see in the slides, it's Gerard Hartman is one of the best physiotherapists in the world, and he said to me, Nolene, have a backup, build your own business, start something, focus on your emotional well-being, your mental well-being, and then you can help other people. So for me, it was all about getting myself right first, and then trying to help others.
I think a lot of athletes will be able to.
I think that was a
will be
really
able to relate to that
important
specific aspect of the
lesson for
journey.
me.
I beg your pardon, Lily. Just coming in here quickly before you continue. I think a lot of athletes will be able to relate to that. We're speaking about mental fatigue and how to build courage. And I asked Nolene the question, what's been one of your toughest moments as an athlete? She's currently working towards the Olympic Games, and she shared that recently she sustained an injury that just she struggled with. There were times she wanted to give up. People told her that it was time to hang up her boots, and so it was. But what I really like about one of the things that you've said is there was the injury that you needed to deal with, right? But also, really importantly, you also need to rehabilitate emotionally and mentally in order for you to bring yourself out of that space. You're just sharing a little bit more of your journey, and I'd love for you to take us through a little bit more of some of the elements, because this is really important. Many athletes will themselves go through this at some point, an injury that threatens the rest of their career. So talk us through again, talk us through more, essentially, of your journey of recovery, of rehabilitation.
Yeah, this life-threatening injury that would cause me to step out of sport. Yes, we know we all have to retire at some stage, but I think as an athlete, I just wanted to get out of it for the longest possible period. And I know I will retire, but I'm not ready to do that yet. So I always said the goal for me was Olympics, and once I get to Olympics and I represent my country at that highest level, then it's time for me to step down and let the youngsters come through. But I think I still have a lot of running in me. I mean, if you look at our sport, we have people running at age 40 and they're still running a 220 marathon. So I mean, the lifespan of long distance runners is good. So that's what also kept me going. And I think one other important thing that kept me going was people that my loved ones and the people closest to me that were continuously checking in on me. They were asking me, Nolene, are you okay? And sometimes I was getting frustrated with them because I didn't want them to ask me all the time, or I didn't want to talk about it all the time. So I kind of like just switched off and trying to ignore people, but I know they were coming from a good place. And I know Ilana always, she was always there to back me. She said, it doesn't matter if you're not running, I'm still here for you in every other aspect, So I think it's just also for me, during that time, I was getting involved in a lot of community things. And I always say to myself, like, Nolene, it's not about you. And through this experience, I learned that it's not about me. There's a lot of things I can do to give back to the sport. And people, there are a lot of athletes out there that are inspired, that need the education, that needs the guidance. And so that is just, and when I do the community work, it just gives me some perspective on, and makes me feel a lot more fulfilled, I think, in a way that I know that I'm doing something good. And it makes me grateful for what I have, because in that sense, also through the injury, I was almost, when I came back, I appreciated my running so much more. It was just like, Nolene, yes, you're not running 33 minutes on a 10K, but you're running. So at least you can go run free outside without any pain. And so I think that's important, just to have gratitude and to look at your life, because we always look at it and we're so critical about our lives, and we say, I don't have this and I don't have that, so I can't perform at this level. But we need to use what we have and be grateful for that.
Absolutely. And I quite like that as a point as well. We always, and Kirsten, maybe bringing some, if there's some science behind this. We're here with you until just 2:30. We're speaking about mind over matter, mental fatigue, how to understand it, how to manage it, and certainly how to build emotional courage. Nolene just sharing some of her journey with us, and certainly what gives her courage. One of the things she's mentioned is gratitude. And we know that this is a big theme. We know that showing gratitude manifests more things to be grateful for. At least that's what is said. Is there any? Maybe I'm reaching here, Dr. Funeka. Is there any science about showing gratitude and how it might actually help with resilience and courage?
For sure, and there is, which is great. So there's actually a whole branch of psychology called positive psychology, which I
Here
don't
we go.
necessarily like the name, but
I'm
it's,
not preaching.
but exactly, and you're absolutely right. This idea of gratitude is this ability to almost just say to be able to pull out of the day, and you also use the other word, which I love, perspective. But it's pulling out of the day something you're right. This is what I'm grateful for today, and some of the science behind it. I spoke about focus earlier, and like your attentional focus. When you are, the technical term is called attentional blindness, and we've all experienced this, where you, like, let's say Nolene, you'll know, when you're racing, like you don't hear the crowd, like you're just so focused on what you're doing, or you're talking with someone, or you're on your phone and someone speaks to you, just don't even hear them or see them. It's an amazing ability that we have. And what we found, like when you're focusing on something like gratitude, on things that, are good in your life, it's not that the bad goes away, it's just that it just recedes a little bit. It's not dominant. And one of the research studies that I can tell you, it was on happiness, was they wanted to know, do more good events happen to happier people and more bad events to unhappier people? And there was a research done in the States, also actually on student athletes, and they found that, and then they took the self-reported happiest people and then unhappiest people, and they found there was a very similar amount of good or bad events that happened in their lives. But the differentiating factor was what they focused on, and this idea of gratitude. So the happier people were grateful for the good things that had happened. They focused more on that, not ignoring and pretending the bad didn't happen. So yeah, to answer your question, there's a lot of science behind it. It's a wonderful concept, and it does also add into this concept of courage.
There we go. So if you didn't have good reason to show gratitude, first Nolene has just shared how expressing gratitude and counting and acknowledging what is happening. We used to sing a song when I was young. My aunt used to sing a song, count your blessings, name them one by one. And I think it's the same thing, right? Just acknowledge the small things that are going right, even when other things are going wrong. The other thing I really liked about your slides, Nolene, is in that slide around injury and rehabilitation. And in fact, in all of your slides, what I notice is that there's a lot of different faces that appear, and so what I'm taking from this really is that in your journey to rehab, you didn't just go to one place and one person, right? And perhaps this is something that we can speak about, how when you're navigating a difficult road, it's important to surround yourself by network. It doesn't have to be 50 people, but maybe just more than one person, because each person contributes something different to your journey, and to this process of building courage and building resilience. Anything to just like add to that, just in your own journey, Nolene? Because I'm looking at all of these different pictures of different peoples, and I see sports science there. I saw you said it's Iceland. I know that there's some pictures there from Stellenbosch, all different elements of this process and different people contributing to it.
Yeah, so I've been blessed. Like there was amazing people that came on board to want to try to help me. A lot of people knew me, so they were trying to get me back to the sport. So that was kind of like hard. What's important as when you become desperate to get back, then you kind of like jump from one person to the next, and that's also not good, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people with their input, and you kind of get overwhelmed at the end of the day, because now you don't know who to listen to, what to do. It all just becomes too much. So I think for me, there was a few times when I became overwhelmed, and we had to just take a step back and say, Nolene, let's just reassess, let's take a break, and let's try something new. So at the end of the day, when something didn't work for us, we just do some research and then look into various people that can help us, and then go from there. But always just to try and keep the circle also at times a bit, small, to try and keep it condensed, so that we don't, otherwise I'd end up seeing 200 people and everyone with their various different things, so that's also something important to consider as well. But I mean, like the journey through injury was, I have met a lot of people. And I mean, if I go to Pot, I know a lot of people there that helped me. I know a lot of people in Pretoria that have helped me. So it is that one does do a lot of networking and build your contacts in that sense. But also on the other side, it can be a bit overwhelming if you are desperate and trying to do too much.
we're about to hit the home stretch of our conversation, looking at the time. And again, I want to end our conversation as we hit this home stretch, looking ahead and looking forward. Nolene, you used a word now that I want us to just unpack over the next few minutes, and you used the word build. This word also came to me when I was looking at one of the other slides around coaching with care and Nolene. And so I guess the concept that I want to introduce is, in times of adversity, when you're feeling down, perhaps one of the questions at some point in the journey is we need to ask ourselves, what are we building? And when I say building, I don't mean building an empire, because sometimes that's just too overwhelming at the time. Building can be, what am I building within, in myself? And so we're speaking about courage and resilience, and how am I taking steps to build that? You know, Nolene, one of the things that you mentioned is that in your journey, now obviously a critical aspect of your expression of self is being an athlete, and you found yourself not being able to compete, not let alone train, of course. And so that expression of self went away. And it was actually at some point, I know that the coaching with Nolene happened, you know, there's probably a process coming, but you were encouraged through your mentors and Anna Mayer to say, what are you building? Let's work on something else. What are you contributing to? It might not just be about yourself. You could be building and contributing to somebody else as well, you know, and we saw the blossoming of your business, but also obviously you pouring yourself into other athletes and building them. So perhaps as we look ahead, you know, let's talk about this concept of building. You know, Nolene, let me just start with you and your own experience you shared, and perhaps, you know, your influence as a mentor and how giving to other people perhaps helped you on this journey. And then I'll come to you, Dr. Van Heerden.
Yeah, so I obviously had incredible mentors that built me up to be where I am today. So it was like when I joined in EuroCAD with Ilana Meyer, she was my mentor right from the start, and she basically helped me on all levels from a sporting to career perspective. They built my brand, her and Janet, who was with Cape Town Marathon. So they helped me build my brand. And in lockdown, I basically came up with the idea that I saw the opportunity to start my own business. I had a lot of time on my hands. I wasn't running back then, but I was doing all these different things like backyard exercises, motivating the people on my social media platforms, basically using my knowledge and experience to build other people up. So what I thought is, why not put that into your own business and make a living off that? So yes, that's when my online coaching was born. I mean, I have all the running experience. I have the qualifications. I'm a sports manager. I've got honors in sports management, and then I've done a few coaching courses. So I thought it is a perfect opportunity to do that. And I thought also it would mean so much to other runners out there, like the social runners, because everyone has been asking my advice on this and that. And so I thought, okay, let me just try and coach a few social runners as well. And I think it was the most fulfilling outcome. Just, you know, it's something different for you to progress in your own sport, but to help someone else achieve that is something incredible. I mean, I've started off with the younger athletes and kind of mentor them and try and help them get to the next level. But now I wanted to move on and focus on my own business and do something for myself as well. And I mean, this will build into my career when I retire from professional running. This is something that I'll walk into and I can just build it from there. And I think for me, the challenge now is to just keep it manageable. So keep the totals within my within what I can handle at the moment, because I still have my running, I still have my work and mentoring at EnduroCAD, and then I have my own business. And I mean, that in itself is a lot. So to try and have balance where I can manage all of those things still and still do my best, you know, and try and achieve Olympic qualifier this year. Yeah, so to not have too much on my plate, but to still, you know, just have the business there as well, so that when I retire, that's something that I will pursue. But I think one important thing about the coaching with care thing that came out of lockdown was that it was amazing to see so many people take on running as new runners during the lockdown. Everyone was obviously so hungry to get out there and start running again. So I think that was fantastic to see everyone just trying to be active and get outside and yeah. It's been
They
incredible.
often say you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And I think that was a lot in the case of a lot of recreational athletes even, who you don't know what you've got until it's actually gone.
Yeah.
But what I really like about this story of yours, you know, you sharing the experience is that out of crisis, you saw opportunity. And we know, we've heard before that, you know, crisis is broken down in the way that the Chinese write it, represents danger on one hand and opportunity on the other. And so we acknowledge the danger in a crisis, you know, the fear, all of these emotions that we've spoken about. But also often in times of crisis, there is an opportunity. And allows us to discover what that opportunity is for ourselves and perhaps for you to extend yourselves out with you. We're speaking about building, you know, this topic of make mind over matter. We also want to look forward and be ahead and speak about, you know, how we can successfully navigate despite the adversity, because adversity will come, fear we will feel, but how do we thrive and conquer over fear? And one concept we're just talking about now is building. You know, what can you build in times of adversity? Dr. Fanyadin, your thoughts or your contribution to this aspect of the conversation?
Yeah, I love the idea, as you say, of both fear and opportunity, and it is that. And it's, again, when we're speaking, because there'll be athletes listening, it's that idea of when you've lost, you can still learn things through it. But you know, and it's probably a slightly different angle to this, but when you talk about building and to talk about some science again, there's, you know, athletes, we talk about skills that they have, determination, and not just athletes, but, you know, coaches as well, you know, determination, goal orientation, commitment. And we think that they're called transferable skills. You'll just transfer that into your work. Like that's how it's going to work. And actually, we know now that that's not necessarily true. Very often, athletes don't transfer those skills into work. And people go, well, why is this happening? And really what it boils down to is meaning and purpose. And that when an athlete finds a goal meaningful and purposeful, they can absolutely transfer all of those incredible skills into that. And if you talk about building, I suppose from my mind, what it links to is that when you have a goal and a dream that is meaningful and is purposeful, it's so much easier then to use those skills to get towards it. And during times of crisis, it maybe makes us reevaluate, or you start new dreams and have new dreams, but they have to be meaningful, purposeful dreams.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, and I think it's really important for me to also further qualify. So I say, what can you build in times of adversity? And I don't want to overwhelm people, you know, because sometimes we're just barely keeping afloat. But
for sure, just getting through is good enough.
Absolutely. Yeah, just surviving.
Yeah.
So don't ask us to change the world, just do it. But building could really be building relationships. Building could be building time for myself. One of the things, one of the really effective tools that I found during the hard lockdown initially was I started meditating. And, you know, it's not like it was the first time I heard of meditation. I heard of meditation, but for some reason it just wasn't something that I could apply in my life before. And of course, there was lockdowns, and I just found the opportunity, you know, a course that took me through over 30 days, the process of meditation. And that built something in me. It built a space and time where I could just be with myself in a blank space, actually. That was quite healing in itself, be in the present moment. And so I think for me, building, it doesn't have to be this overwhelming concept like the inspirational game changers like Nolene, you know, who are building a business, which is fantastic. But it could also just be start with what are you building for yourself or within yourself to help you become more resilient, to build yourself up, you know, quite literally. And of course, you know, there is definitely opportunity. You know, crisis brings about new challenges, new problems. And therefore, there's an opportunity to solve those problems, which is what Nolene did with her business. The challenge, you know, became, you know, how do we keep active at this time? And she started doing social media classes and hooking onto people on their interest of outdoor activity, recreational athletes. So perhaps you can also, in your time, ask yourself, think about the conversations that you're having with your friends and families. What are the current problems that are coming up? And could you potentially provide a solution to that? And that solution might even have a business that takes you into the next chapter.
Actually, and can I jump in there? I just wanted to jump in there. Actually, I was going to mention earlier, and I forgot to, like, when the student athlete was asking and talking about online learning, and I know even like this with Zoom calls or Skype calls or things like that, I was going to say we also need to be careful that we don't just think it's worse, like online learning is worse, or doing Zoom workshops is worse than face-to-face. It's different, but there's some, as you say, there's opportunity in it. I've learned far more about Zoom than I have ever thought that I would, and all these like really little cool things that you can do in it, and even like platforms like this that we're using today instead of the streaming, you know, there is opportunity. Sometimes it can be even better. It doesn't mean, again, we don't want to go back to some sense of normality and see people face to face, but I think it's dangerous when we think it's just worse and I just need to try and get through it. There's always something that could even be better.
And looking ahead, of course, there is a new normal, and some things are returning, although their return won't necessarily look like they used to. We know that since we're in the sports world right now and speaking to a lot of sports stakeholders, we know that thankfully some games and competitions have resumed, some championships have resumed. It won't look the same as it used to, but thank goodness we've got something to work towards. So, in wrapping up, Nolene, your advice to athletes and coaches, in fact, as they begin to prepare for these events that have reappeared in our calendar.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part of it.
We are just wrapping up, Nolene, and I'm asking with excitement because now we've got events that are planned and scheduled again as we return to a new normal. So your advice to athletes and coaches as we prepare for this next phase of normal and obviously these competitions that have now come up.
Yes, I would say my biggest advice is don't overdo it. I think everyone would be so eager to get back into competitions and stuff. So then they would want to race. And almost like, I think in all sports, do too much. But I think that is what lockdown almost taught us, is just to build yourself nicely. We spoke about building, so you build the level of conditioning, you build up your skills, but then to also to plan properly. And so, you know, going into the next phase, plan your races very smartly, plan your workload very smartly so that you obviously sustain yourself until the end of the year so that we don't fatigue ourselves now. Going in, we're all excited and now we just want to go in full speed. You know, it's just pace yourself, as we would say. But yeah, it's nice to get back to a bit of normality again and to start competing again.
Really sound words from Nolene Conrad, warning us that as we now get back into the swing of things, though it's a new normal, just remember to pace yourself so that you don't overextend yourself and find yourselves fatigued. And that's what we're talking about, mental fatigue, how to manage it, how to prevent it. So pace yourself in the activities that you plan, in the rate at which you start taking new things on, and of course with the gusto that you just embark on this mission. Dr. Van Heerden, your advice to athletes, coaches, and stakeholders.
Yeah, you know, I think, as you say, things are starting again, and there's still, though, all this uncertainty. And an athlete said this to me the other day, which I really like this concept. You know, she said, you know, I have to learn to do things now that'll make it easier for my future self, you know, so to be kind to my future self. And I really like that idea. So the world will start again, sports will start again, the competitions will, when, we don't know, but they will. And so to make sure that you're doing some things now, whether it's training, whether it's rehab, whether it's, you know, diet, nutrition, as you said, meditation, but do things now that will help your future self. And so when things get back to, say, some sense of, want of a word, normal, you're not lagging behind. So yeah, be kind to your future self, do some things now.
Absolutely, I really like the concept. Be kind to yourself and be kind to your future self by being intentional now. We're getting a few comments around what people view as their own take-home messages. And for me, that's a good sign that they found this engagement meaningful and relevant. And so I want to just take a moment to thank our two guests today. Nolene, thank you very much for sharing your insights. I know you had connection issues, and I appreciate you moving around to try to reconnect and make sure that you stay connected with us. Thank you for sharing your personal journey and also how you've impacted others. Dr. Van Heerden, thank you for joining us and thank you for bringing the insights. Thank you for tying in what we know we feel sometimes inside with some science, you know, that grounds us and validates, you know, some of the journey that we're on, some of the actions that we take. And really importantly, giving us some practical tools and tips around how to navigate the space in which we find ourselves. So thank you to both of you, Dr. Van Heerden and Nolene.
No, and thank you as well, and thank you, Nolene, and you know the South African Women in Sport Foundation as well. It's been really fantastic. I've also learned some things, and as I said, it's been wonderful to chat.
So in wrapping up again, I just want to acknowledge the Executive Committee of the South African Women in Sports Foundation, our chair, Ndambi Ravele. Thank you for creating this platform. We are really excited to be kicking off the series in 2020, one day at a time. We will be with you every month, and just stay tuned for the date that we will come together on this platform, invite different guests, different people moderating, and journey with you as you thrive in the year ahead. So from me, your host, thank you very much to everybody that joined us today. Feel free to share this link with people even after our live broadcast. And I like what's happening here. I like the fact that people are throwing in the little gems. So by all means, just throw in on Facebook, on Instagram, what you found to be particularly meaningful. We appreciate and we value your feedback, and we all continue to learn from each other. From me, your moderator for today, Dr. Patho Zondi, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to be with you. Go well, stay safe, and have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye.
With you.